It was supposed to be a normal evening. I had spent the whole day running errands and meeting an old friend across town. By the time I was heading home, the sky had already turned dark and the cool night air carried the smell of rain. I felt tired and decided to stop at a small restaurant near the highway for a cup of tea before driving back. The place was warm and lively. Soft yellow lights hung from the ceiling, and quiet music played in the background. People were laughing, talking, and enjoying their meals. It felt peaceful, the kind of place where strangers could forget their worries for a while. I sat at a table near the window and ordered tea. While waiting, I absent-mindedly watched the waitresses moving between the tables. One of them caught my attention immediately. She was moving slower than the others. Carefully, almost painfully, she carried a heavy tray of glasses, but her steps were cautious, as if every movement required extra effort. When she turned slightly toward the counter, the light fell across her face, and my heart nearly stopped. I froze in my seat. No, it couldn't be, but the more I looked, the more certain I became. It was Aisha.my daughter-in-law, and she was heavily pregnant. Her belly was clearly visible beneath the loose uniform dress, round and full. She had to be at least 8 months along. For a moment I couldn't breathe. 3 months earlier my son Hamza had told me something completely different. He had said Aisha wanted to stay with her parents during the last months of her pregnancy so she could rest. Mom, her mother wants to take care of her, he had explained. It's better for her. I believed him, why wouldn't I? But now here she was, working, serving tables, standing for hours while carrying a child. A deep sense of unease settled in my chest. Aisha had always been a gentle girl. Even before she married my son, she was polite, respectful, and kind. She treated me like her own mother from the very beginning, and now, she looked completely different. Her face seemed thinner. Dark circles rested under her eyes, and the smile she usually carried was gone. Instead, there was a quiet exhaustion in the way she moved. MYT arrived, but I didn't touch it. I couldn't stop staring. She walked to another table, wrote something in a small notebook, then carefully picked up empty plates. Every movement looked harder than the last. A pregnant woman should not be doing this kind of work, especially not this late in her pregnancy. Something was very wrong. My heart began pounding louder with every second. Finally, I couldn't sit still anymore. I slowly stood up and walked across the restaurant toward her. As I got closer, I noticed something else. Her hands were slightly trembling as she balanced the tray. Aisha? I said softly. The moment she heard my voice, she froze. The tray in her hand shook slightly before she quickly placed it on the nearby table. Then she turned around. When our eyes met, time seemed to stop. Her eyes widened in shock. Mom. Her voice came out as a whisper, filled with disbelief. For a moment neither of us spoke. I could see tears beginning to form in her eyes, and confusion spread across her face. Aisha, what are you doing here? I asked gently, trying to understand. She looked around nervously, as if afraid someone might hear us. I work here, she said quietly. The words didn't make sense in my mind. Work? I repeated, yes. I glanced down at her stomach, my chest tightening. Aisha, you're 8 months pregnant, I said softly. Why are you working in a restaurant? Her lips trembled slightly. And why didn't Hamza tell me? I added. The moment I mentioned my son's name, something changed in her expression. The tears in her eyes finally spilled over. For a few seconds she said nothing, then she took a slow, shaky breath. He told you I left. Didn't he? She asked quietly. My stomach dropped. Yes, I answered slowly. He said you went to stay with your parents. Aisha let out a small, broken laugh, but there was no humor in it, only pain. She looked down at the floor, wiping her tears quickly with the back of her hand. That's not true, she whispered. A cold chill ran through me. I stepped closer, my voice barely above a breath. Aisha, what happened? She lifted her eyes to meet mine again, and the words she said next shattered everything I thought I knew. He didn't let me stay, she said softly. He threw me out. After her shift ended, the restaurant slowly grew quieter. Most of the customers had left, and the staff began cleaning the tables. Aisha walked toward me again, moving even more slowly now that the long evening of work was over. Can we sit for a few minutes? I asked gently. She hesitated for a moment, then nodded. We chose a small table in the corner where no one would disturb us. I noticed how carefully she lowered herself into the chair, holding her stomach with one hand. The exhaustion on her face made my heart ache. You haven't eaten, have you? I asked. She quickly shook her head. I'm fine. But I knew she wasn't. I called the waiter and ordered a warm meal and a glass of milk for her. At first she tried to refuse, but I insisted. You're not eating for one anymore, I said softly. My grandchild needs strength. The moment I said those words, her eyes filled with tears again. When the food arrived, she began eating slowly, like someone who hadn't had a proper meal in days. Her hands trembled slightly as she held the spoon. I sat quietly, watching her, trying to control the storm of emotions inside me. Finally, when she finished eating, I asked the question that had been burning in my mind since I walked into the restaurant. Aisha, tell me the truth. What really happened between you and Hamza? She stayed silent for a long moment, her eyes lowered to the table, and her fingers nervously twisted the edge of a napkin. It started 3 months ago, she said quietly. Her voice was soft, but every word carried pain. Hamza's business wasn't doing well. He had been stressed for weeks. At first he only complained about money, about the bills, about how expensive everything was becoming. I listened carefully. At the beginning I tried to support him, she continued. I told him things would get better. I cooked his favorite meals and tried to keep the house peaceful. She paused, swallowing hard, but one night he came home very angry. Her hands tightened around the napkin. He said the baby was the reason for his problems. My heart clenched. He said everything became harder after I stopped working, she added quietly. I tried to explain that the doctor told me to rest during the pregnancy, but he didn't want to listen. I could hardly believe what I was hearing. Aisha, I whispered, but she continued speaking. The argument got worse and worse, she said. He started shouting. I had never seen him like that before. Tears rolled down her cheeks. I told him we were supposed to be a family, that we should face problems together. She looked up at me then, her eyes filled with hurt, but he didn't see it that way. What did he do? I asked, my voice shaking. She took a deep breath before answering. He told me I was a burden. The words felt like a knife in my chest. Then she continued. He packed my clothes into a bag and threw it near the door. My heart pounded louder. I thought he was just angry, she said. I thought he would calm down in the morning. Her voice cracked, but then he opened the door and told me to leave. I felt my hands grow cold. You were pregnant, I said slowly. Yes, she whispered. And he still forced you out? She nodded. For a few seconds neither of us spoke. The noise of dishes being washed in the kitchen echoed faintly through the restaurant, but the silence between us felt heavy. Where did you go? I finally asked. I rented a small room near here, she replied. It's cheap and close to this restaurant. You started working immediately? She nodded again. I needed money for rent, for food, and for doctor visits. My chest tightened painfully. You should have called me, I said. She looked at me sadly. I wanted to, she admitted. Then why didn't you? Her answer came so quietly I almost didn't hear it, because Hamza told me something before I left. What did he say? She wiped her tears and looked directly into my eyes. He said if I told you the truth, you would choose him anyway. My breath caught in my throat, and I didn't want to destroy the relationship between a mother and her son. She finished softly. For a moment, I couldn't speak. The girl sitting in front of me had been abandoned, betrayed, and forced to work while carrying my grandchild, yet she had still tried to protect my relationship with my son. In that moment I realized something important. This girl wasn't just my daughter-in-law, she was my daughter, and someone had deeply wronged her, unfortunately for my son. I had just learned the truth. That night, sleep refused to come. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling while Aisha's words echoed again and again in my mind. He packed my clothes and told me to leave. Every time I remembered her standing in that restaurant, pregnant, exhausted, trying to survive on her own, my chest tightened with anger and shame. How could my own son do something like that? I had raised Hamza to respect women, to protect his family, to be responsible. At least, that's what I believed, but the truth I heard tonight showed me a different version of him, a version I barely recognized. Around midnight I finally sat up, unable to rest any longer. My thoughts were racing, and one thing became clear. Ignoring this situation was not an option. If Hamza had done something wrong, he needed to face the consequences, and if Aisha had been wronged, she deserved justice. The next morning, I picked up my phone and called him. He answered quickly, sounding relaxed. Good morning, Mom, he said casually. Hamza, I replied calmly. Come to my house today. I need to talk to you. About what? We'll discuss it when you get here. There was a short pause. All right, he said. I'll be there in an hour. I ended the call and placed the phone down slowly. For the next hour I prepared myself for a conversation I never imagined having with my own child. When Hamza arrived, he looked completely normal. He walked into the living room with the same confident attitude he always carried. Mom, what's going on? He asked, sitting on the couch. You sounded serious on the phone. I stood near the table, watching him carefully. I saw Aisha yesterday, I said. The effect was immediate. The relaxed smile on his face disappeared. For a moment he said nothing, then he forced a small laugh. Oh, that, he said casually. She probably told you a dramatic story. My jaw tightened. Dramatic story? I repeated, yes, he shrugged. She's very emotional these days. Pregnancy hormones, you know. The calm way he dismissed everything made my anger grow stronger. Stop lying, Hamza, I said firmly. That he looked at me, surprised by my tone. Mom, what do you mean? I mean, I know the truth, I replied. The room suddenly felt heavy with tension. You threw your pregnant wife out of the house. His face hardened. You don't understand the situation, he said quickly. She wasn't helping with anything. I had financial pressure, business problems, so you abandoned her? I interrupted. He frowned. She left because she wanted to, he insisted. Really? I asked. I walked toward the table and picked up a folder. Inside were several documents I had prepared earlier that morning. Hamza watched me carefully as I placed them in front of him. What's this? He asked. Take a look. He opened the folder and began reading. At first he looked confused, then slowly, his expression changed. Mom, he said quietly. Yes, I replied calmly. Those are the property papers for your house. His eyes widened slightly. But why are you showing me this? Because you seem to have forgotten something important. I folded my arms and looked directly at him. The house is still legally in my name. Silence filled the room. Several years earlier, when Hamza had wanted to buy his home, I had helped him financially. At the time it was simply easier to keep the property registered under my name. I never imagined the decision would one day matter like this, but today, it did. Hamza stared at the documents again, realizing what they meant. Mom, what are you saying? I'm saying you have two choices, I replied calmly. He swallowed nervously. First option, I continued. You apologize to your wife, bring her home, and start acting like a responsible husband and father. I paused for a moment. Second option, I tapped the papers lightly. You move out of my house. His eyes shot up to meet mine. You wouldn't do that, he said quickly, but the confidence in his voice was gone. For the first time in his life, he realized something important. His mother was not automatically on his side, was on the side of what was right, and right now, he was very, very wrong. Hamza sat frozen on the couch, staring at the documents in front of him. The confidence he had walked in with was gone, replaced by shock and disbelief. Mom, you're serious? He asked quietly. I looked straight at him. I've never been more serious in my life. The room was silent except for the faint ticking of the clock on the wall. Hamza ran his hands through his hair, clearly struggling to process what was happening. You're choosing her over me, he finally said. His words stung, but they didn't change my mind. This isn't about choosing sides, I replied firmly. This is about right and wrong. He shook his head in frustration. You don't understand what I've been going through, he argued. My business is failing, the bills keep piling up, and she just sits at home doing nothing. I had too much pressure. I felt anger rise inside me again. Doing nothing? I repeated sharply. She was carrying your child. He looked away, unable to meet my eyes. A husband's responsibility isn't only when things are easy, I continued. It's when life becomes difficult. For a moment he said nothing, then he muttered quietly, I didn't think it would go this far. My voice softened slightly, but my resolve remained strong. Well, it has. I pointed toward the folder again. You have two choices, Hamza. Apologize to your wife and fix this mess, or find somewhere else to live. He sat there for a long time, thinking, but the truth was, my decision had already been made, whether he accepted responsibility or not. I was no longer going to ignore what had happened to Aisha. A few hours later, I left the house and drove back to the restaurant. The afternoon sun was shining through the windows when I walked inside. The place wasn't as crowded as the night before. Aisha was standing near the counter, writing something in her small notebook. When she saw me walk in, her face immediately filled with worry. "Mom, is everything okay?" she asked, walking toward me slowly. I could see the anxiety in her eyes, as if she was afraid something worse had happened. But this time, I smiled. "Yes, everything is going to be okay," I said gently. She looked confused. "What happened?" I reached for her hand and held it warmly. "Pack your things," I told her. Her eyes widened in surprise. "Pack my things?" "Yes." "But why?" she asked nervously. "Because you're not living alone anymore." Tears instantly filled her eyes again. "Mom, I can't move back with Hamza," she said quickly. "I don't want to cause more problems between you two." I gently shook my head. "You're not going back to him right now," I explained. Her eyebrows lifted in confusion. "Then, where will I go?" I squeezed her hand softly. "You're coming with me." "With you?" she whispered. "Yes," I said with a warm smile. "To my house." For a moment she looked completely speechless. "But I don't want to be a burden," she said quietly. "You are not a burden," I replied firmly. "You are the mother of my grandchild, and from today forward, you are also my daughter." Her tears began falling freely now, but this time they weren't tears of pain, they were tears of relief. She tried to speak, but her voice broke. "Thank you, Mom," she finally whispered. I wrapped my arms around her carefully, mindful of her baby bump. At that moment, I realized something important. Sometimes revenge doesn't mean hurting the person who caused the pain. Sometimes the sweetest revenge is simply protecting the person they tried to break. Hamza believed he could abandon his wife and face no consequences. But now he would learn an important lesson. Respect, responsibility, and family are not optional, and until he understood that, he would have to live with the consequences of his choices. As for Aisha, she would never have to face the world alone again, because this time, she had someone standing firmly on her side.